Talk Rollerblading on the Then and Now Blading YouTube channel. Hey Frank, we had a false start.
Okay.
I didn't time my intro very good, but it's good to see you again. We were on here last week for episode 26 of the Then and Now Blading podcast. If you didn't catch it, Frank and I reminisced on our history in Austin, Texas, and we talked all things skating, and we had such a good time that we decided we would do another show, but this time for episode 6 of Let's Talk Rollerblading. Let's Talk Rollerblading. And we came up with some topics we're going to discuss today. We want to involve everybody in the live chat in these discussions because most of these topics are, very opinionated. So it's personal preference,
Yeah.
a lot of it. But Frank, what topic should we start out with today?
Well, yeah, for a broad disclaimer right at the beginning, I would say, the way that they put the big spoiler warning on the front of the, videos, we say, obviously this is, what do you call it? Not, it's totally biased. We're going to try to be as fair and reasonable as we can, but we're talking about our own views here. So, whatever the topic, what do we got? Where's my list? Hold on. We got influential tricks. Let's go for that.
All right. Well, most influential tricks for me would be tricks that I guess most influential tricks are tricks that inspired me to do certain tricks I did in the past.
Okay.
What does it mean to you? Or most influential tricks to the sport itself, or most influential tricks to yourself?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I would try to answer that with obviously rooted in my own bias, but tricks that I think changed how rollerbladers looked at rollerblading is the approach I would take. Now,
Okay.
I'm largely speaking for myself, but based on everybody I know and the different places I've traveled to, lots of these things would have affected people in the same way. So I would probably produce two different lists if I was going to say the ones that were most influential to me in my own skating, and then the ones that affected skating and broadly, I think would be a slightly separate list. There may be a couple of overlaps, but we can get into that once we start naming off people and tricks and shit.
So, what do you want to start with? Ones that are influential to you, or ones that are influential to the sport itself?
Oh, well, I guess I kind of meant that hypothetically. I guess I haven't prepared my own list. I'd have to think about that for a second. Tricks that I think were influential to rollerblading are going to cover. Let's do that first, okay?
All right, let's do that one. And we should probably start with the first person to grind, which, since we do aggressive inline, grinding is a big part of that. And that would have been Chris Edwards.
Yeah.
And we've kind of had this discussion earlier. What was the first documented photo or video of Chris Edwards? There's one I remember of him doing a frontside on a rail, and then there was a Chris Edwards ad of him doing a frontside. But when I was doing some research earlier, I found him doing a tap on a handrail in vertical access from 1991. And I actually have a clip of that, so you can watch it so you guys know what we're talking about. So that was Chris Edwards, his first documented grind on a rail. It was more of a tap, which is what a lot of people did on rails back in that early days of skating. When they didn't know what they were doing, they would just kind of go real fast, stick their feet on it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that happened a lot at Spaghetti Warehouse Rail in Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
where you're pretty much jumping the stairs and in one way or another kind of just dragging your legs across the rail as you jump the staircase.
So that's what that clip was of Chris Edwards.
Yeah.
And although it was new and groundbreaking, would you classify that as an actual grind?
I mean, the stickler in me is going to want to call that something like a proto grind, something like that, where you have to have done that before you can, grind on a rail the way that we do now and have for the last whatever 30 years. Is it a real grind? No. If I showed somebody a clip of me doing that today and said, "Hey, look at this clip of me doing a front side down this rail," no one would agree that that was a grind. It certainly isn't the front side. The back foot almost looks like it's doing a Royale, but really, he's just dragging his feet along there. So it's not like he's bearing weight on the rail anyway. So
Right.
any definition of grinding would have to include bearing weight, because otherwise you're just dragging your feet along something, which isn't to say that it's, I don't know, it's just in that gray area. You know what I mean?
Well, I would say it's definitely he was definitely doing something outrageous at the time.
Yeah, no question about that.
And did it look good? Not really, but it was cool and new, and definitely probably inspired people to want to do the same thing, because that's how I started. My inspiration, which I've mentioned this before, but it's when we were playing roller hockey at Austin High School, and a car pulled up, and it had Taz and B Love from Houston, and Taz did a soul stall on the bike rack. B did like a 3-stair rail, and that was my inspiration. Neither one of those tricks were like by any means impressive, or even a year after that, but those really basic, primitive tricks inspired me to start skating.
Yeah,
so I feel like that people who watched Vertical Access in 1991 saw Chris Edwards slapping that rail and started doing the exact same thing and refining it. And we have a picture of Chris Edwards from. We couldn't find the first photo we were thinking of, but in 1994, he had a rollerblade ad, which is probably like one of the first documented photos of somebody grinding a rail of this size. This is actually a real grind.
It's a legit size rail, too.
And this is the photo. Let me see where I have it right here. And it's him doing a front side on, like a 20-stair rail. And this is going to be in Encinitas, I believe, or Escondido in San Diego County. And this was a rollerblade ad that I believe appeared in Daily Bread magazine, if I'm not mistaken. So what do you think about this? This is definitely a clean-looking front side.
So, he's obviously bearing weight. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, it looks to me like he's about to come off, but that's neither here nor there. But that is for sure a legit-ass handrail. I mean, like you said, it's probably 20 stairs or more. So I mean, that's that. So as far as talking about what is influential, I would think, what's when you're dealing with influence, you're dealing with how you're making other people think, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think that skating or rollerblading is about, going out on the boardwalk and doing stair bashing and jumping over trash cans and stuff like that, it totally transforms your thinking if now there's grinding available, So that first grind would have opened people's eyes to it. And then that second photo 3 odd years later would have shown people it's grown in its existence, where it's no longer merely just dragging your legs across a thing, but actually standing up proper on a rail and balancing and sliding down it. And it's on stairs, which I think is worth pointing out too, that it's not a handicap rail. It's not an ADA rail. It's not a ground rail. It's not a bike rack. It's a fucking handrail. That would be, challenging conceptually if you're a kid who's 14 years old or 16 years old or however old anybody was back then, and think, okay, there's this whole other level now of tricks, because everything else had been either rolling based tricks like stair riding and curb bashing and that kind of thing. And then you would have had jumping tricks where you're jumping and spinning or jumping over something or whatever. So really you only had rolling tricks and jumping tricks. And then this adds an entire new canon to their repertoire, which is grinding tricks.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that trick has to be on the list of most influential because it's what got the whole thing started. That front side is pretty legit. The big one on the 20 stair or whatever, That's pretty fucking legit. The first one, I would call it a proto grind to me, but it's still got whatever was the first, however you count it. That's got to be the beginning of it, because
I agree with you. And another topic we're going to discuss a little bit later is the quantum leaps of when like skating kind of evolved from jump to jump. This is one of them. Most of these early videos you see, like vertical access, these were all made by Rollerblade. These were promo videos. So I don't remember the names of them. They had tons of them.
Yeah.
And so this video would have been the vertical jump from the last one because it's the first one to have. I mean, the quantum jump from the last one because it was the first one to have some sort of grind.
Yeah.
And then now that he has a bounce on the rail, that would be another quantum jump. Obviously, there was some other videos in that period. Right around Chris Edwards doing that front side was where they started doing pretty good grinds. But
yeah,
what was some other influential tricks for you and in the sport?
Well, for both, I think it was VG3 or VG4. I think it was VG3 where Roadhouse did the big Royale down the long, 20-30 stair ledge in Corpus Christi. I always just assumed that was the hotel they were staying at, but because there's not that many hotels, it wasn't. It was South Padre, not Corpus. That big Royale that Roadhouse did, he does the Royale down the big thing and then lands and then does a 180 over the second set, which is like maybe 9 or 10 stairs, something. And he lands and like catches himself on the seawall, and you can see this huge relief on his face. Like I lived through it, thank God, or whatever. Or I did it. Maybe he's been trying that all afternoon. Who knows? And people were cheering. That would have been 95-6 territory, something like that. That to me represents a big influence for skating because not only, well, for one thing, we've bypassed the idea of getting Royale tricks, which was its own whole thing in itself, but also the scale where it's just a giant ledge. It's a full, close to 2-story drop off on the side, and it's a ledge, not a rail. That would be another one that I would put on the list of everybody. It's like throwing down the gauntlet where everybody has to step up their game now. You can't just be dragging your feet across a 3-stair. You've got to go out and do something legit if you want people to care.
I think one thing influential as well with Roadhouse at that point was he was young and he was the age of most of the skaters.
Yeah.
The kids skating when everybody else around there was already older, like an older generation. Roadhouse was like the new, even in inline skating or rollerblading, the generations are very quick. It's like only a few years until a new generation.
How long do you think they are, Jan?
Well, I feel like in the early 90s, or probably from 91 to 2000, there could have been 3 generations.
Okay. So more like 3 years rather than, say, 5 years.
Yeah.
In my mind, I've always had 5 years. That would separate, for instance, the entire span of high school, where if you have middle schoolers, they're skating in a totally different world than someone who's already graduated high school. Where I think when we met you were probably 19 already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you would have already been out of high school by then. So that to me, 4 years ish is always seemed like the right 4 or 5 years. But I agree with you that the kind of turnover in the early days, the first decade, really, you probably have three generations in the 90s, where by that standard, I would have been either second wave or third wave. A long time ago, when Angie Walton was on the Mushroom Blading podcast, she identified herself as a 3rd generation rollerblader, which I at the time thought was absolutely crazy, but she was counting the very beginning of when rollerblades existed through the company Rollerblade. And then she was counting like the rollerblade dance team and those guys who were doing tricks and stuff. There's a woman who I'm friends with on Facebook whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. Jill somebody. Anyway, Angie counted Jill and those folks as the second generation, and then her and her contemporaries, which would have been Arlo and Chris Edwards and all that, as like the third generation.
I would say maybe in the whole scope of all of inline skating, but when we're only talking about aggressive skating,
Right. Yeah.
I
So
would consider those early people I mean, sure, they're like some, they wouldn't be skating without them,
right.
but within aggressive skating, I would put Angie Walton as first generation.
Would you put yourself?
I know I would put myself as second generation because,
Okay.
well, maybe first generation. I mean, I guess so because I started skating in 1989. So I guess that would put me in first generation for aggressive because I was there before grinding.
John Liskey is the same, and he might be older than you. I can't remember, but he imagines himself as having already been a rollerblader, already had pro design knee pads, already had been to the skate parks and all that stuff, and was doing that regularly. Not necessarily daily, but at least going to the skate park weekly or so many times a month or whatever, out in Baltimore, and he remembers rollerblading before grinding happened. And so to me, a good line in the sand would be, were you rollerblading and doing tricks, and were you in any way established with the rest of the rollerbladers before grinding happened? That to me would be a good indicator for first generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then if grinding was already going on and you saw people that already had established that there was, say, front side and backside and Mizu and soul grind, then that has to be at a minimum second generation.
So that would be you.
Probably around that, yeah. It's these generations. I'm kind of in between the oldest millennial and the youngest Gen X, whereas you're solidly Gen X, having been born in the 70s. I've gone several different ways on this because I really don't want to be a millennial, but there's a thing called Zennial, which a sociologist has proposed, which is like a micro generation that exists from like 1979 to like 1985, and it's a generation of note in the mainstream culture because it would be the very last group of kids to have had a fully analog childhood and a fully digital adulthood, whereas everybody born after that would have been digital their whole life.
Right.
Like there was always the internet.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know. And then I read a thing the other day because I was arguing about it with somebody, and there's a study from Harvard that establishes what the generations are, and it runs Gen X through. So sorry. The Harvard study is what's used by the U.S. Census. So whether that affects, whether you think it's real or not, they're saying 1965 to 1985 is Gen X. 85 starts sounding pretty late to me, but 65 sounds pretty early. But then you think about like Kurt Cobain and people like that were born in like 67.
Mm-hmm.
So he would be like the oldest of Gen X.
Right.
And I would be like the absolute youngest. Well, people born in 1985, I guess, would be the absolute youngest. But you always hear all these dumb cutoffs. Anyway, in the general public, I think the generations are more like 20 years.
Yeah.
But I think that you're right. In rollerblading, especially in the early days, turnover with generations seemed to be more like 3.
Well, I would say in Austin, it would have been, me probably was, me and like Jason and Lonnie all kind of started skating before grinding for the most part.
Yeah.
And then you came along, and Anthony Medina and Jay and Jared.
Yeah.
And then at the tail end of the 90s would have been like Be Free and Zach Gutweiler and Mason. Like around 99.
Those dudes would have been like children.
Yeah, they would have been children, but they would have been like a third generation in Austin scene.
Oh, yeah. Yes, in Austin, absolutely.
So that's just 3 generations in Austin.
Yeah, no, that's true. And even those dudes were showing up. I remember Be Free for sure. I remember Mason, but a little bit later. Like I was in college when I met Mason the first time. So that would have been after 2000. Doesn't mean he wasn't around. It just means that I didn't meet him until then. But Shannon and Jason and those guys were better at like scooping up younger people and taking them skating and hanging out and that kind of thing.
There's a few comments in the live chat. I thought we touched base on a couple of those before there's too many to address. Jacob had mentioned going back to Chris Edwards. Those groundbreaking tricks like Chris Edwards frontside and Arlo doing the slow grind really progressed the sport. And I think we can agree with Jacob. Right, Frank? Or no?
I'm trying to read.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Did you highlight it? Is that highlighted? The groundbreaking tricks really progress the sport. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So that's that. We're in agreement with that. And then I guess one question is Jared asked a question, why wouldn't you base first gen when the first aggressive skates came out, like when Fatties came out?
Fatties weren't the first to come out, for one thing.
What would be the first aggressive skate? A Tarmac?
The Tarmacs, yeah.
So I think...
And that's in that ad. The logo for the Tarmac, if you pull up that front side picture again, at the center of that image is the Tarmac CE logo.
Oh, let me get rid of that banner. Question, where is
that's that? T with the C and the circle and the CE and all that, because it was the Chris Edwards.
Yeah, right there.
Tarmac. That was the logo for that skate. And that you said was from 94. So that's
94, yeah.
And then the Fatty must have been 95 or 96. But, you know, people doing the thing before there's a market to supply products for it, I wouldn't mark necessarily the beginning as when the products were available, because the market had to already be there. So dudes were already grinding and jumping off of shit and needing, you know, these changes to rollerblades before the market was able to supply those things.
And there would have been no market had it not been for those early innovators.
Yeah, somebody's got to be the first to jump on a rail or jump over a car or whatever. So to me, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg, but to me, the chicken has to come first because it does.
So I want to go on another influential trick.
Okay.
To skating, you know, a lot of these Midwest guys and are really good. And there's Dave Kolash. And Dave Kolash, you know, you had mentioned in the podcast that, you know, Dave Kolash was very influential and he did a lot of big tricks. And then by the time you got to Woodward, you guys were, you know, had almost gotten better than him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we wouldn't have been better at doing, you know, sweat stance down a wall rail in the snow.
Right. I mean, he did crazy tricks in his era. And one of those it's a timeless trick is him doing the front side down a 244 rail.
Yeah, in Omaha.
You know, a bunch of videos.
Yeah.
First appearance would have been in Mad Beef, which was, I believe, in 1995 or 1994. So Mad Beef, same year of that Chris Edwards frontside photo, was Mad Beef. And I have that clip. We can watch it so you guys know what we're talking about. And that is Mad Beef.
Got it.
Now, this rail is in Omaha, Nebraska. It's not really a city a lot of people make as a destination to go to, but it is on a major interstate, and a lot of people drive through there, and a lot of skaters have made it a mission to stop and skate that rail when they do. So I would put this, not just this trick, but the spot as one of the most iconic spots in inline skating. And there's been a lot of crazy tricks. I think the craziest trick would have been Luke Bender's
rough
grind on that rail, which I don't have a clip of, but it is insane.
Yeah, I would really like to have tried an alley-oop soul down that back in the day when I could have potentially done it. That would if I could have done that, that would maybe rival Luke's rough grind. The rough grind is insane. I can't believe he did that, but that's one of those tricks that he's got in his bag. So good on Luke for getting it done.
Gnarly. I know that's his trick, and he does it really good in a lot of stuff. He's done at Kingston, which is crazy too. But it's a long rail to hold that trick on.
Yeah, it is.
I mean Jason held that on Valley View in Austin. Some rails that were pretty big, but this is
yeah, but Valley View's what, 20 stairs or 18 stairs, and that's 244 feet. When you stop measuring in stairs and start counting in feet, you're in a different league. Yeah, I think that front side would be another one, kind of like the Roadhouse Royale in South Padre, where you're kind of throwing down the gauntlet to show people this is how big it can be. You could grind a rail that's as long as a football field, and on stairs to boot. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That it's sort of broadening people's scope as far as how big rollerblading could be in terms of the scale of the tricks. So that would definitely be a big influence, particularly as some people looked at rollerblading along the lines of how big can we possibly go, whether it's gaps or rails, and that would have been a line in the sand for those folks who thought that way, to think, all right, if you can go 244 feet, you can go as long as you can make a rail. However long you can make a rail, somebody can grind it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, with the 1.5 he did, the 666 rail.
Yeah, exactly. That's almost three times longer.
Yeah. Now, what's the longest rail you've ever done?
Oh man, I don't know. The hardest rail was probably the 22 kink in Austin.
Oh, that's a spot. What was that in?
It was in Muerte, I think. Muerte or one of the other early. Lonnie had a video called. There's Muerte. There was Muerte 2. He did a video called like My Summer Vacation, something like that. He did Language. It might have been in Language. Now that I think about it, I was kind of bummed because I wanted him to use it in our Battle My Crew section, because then a ton more people would have seen it and known that I did that rail, and did it pretty well. I gotta say, I only did it the once, but it took about 3 hours to do it because the rail goes down flat, down flat, down flat or something, and then it kinks almost 90 degrees to the left, and there's a big drop off. The drop off till you hit the ground is maybe only about 8 feet, but it's on a steep ass hill. So if you go off the rail at all, now you're falling 15 feet or so, and then it's a steep ass hill that you're going to tumble all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
Pat Lennon and I were at Woodward a million years ago, and we were going to drive to. There was a dude there who was telling us about a rail that went through his entire community college, and you could skate it, but only at night because the security guards got off at 9 o'clock or whatever. And he came to me with it and was like, this dude says he's got this rail, and if there's any two people who can do it, it's you and me. So let's drive out there and try it. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, let's get in the car. I had driven that year, so I had my vehicle. So him and me hopped in my Xterra and started driving there. And then the power went out in the entire Northeast. I mean, it was a major blackout, like from Ohio all the way to Maine, had no power. And so halfway through the middle of Pennsylvania, we were like, well, there's no point in going there if there's not going to be lights. We can't do it in the dark. But the impression that I had is that rail would have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet long. It went all the way through a campus. And it was kinked at some parts, and then had long sections of handicap rail, and then kinked again and curved again. And like, it was this continuous rail from end to end of the entire campus. We never got to skate it. And I never even went to the community college to even look at it. But the 22 kink, or there's a rail I don't know if it's still there. I think it's still there. There's a rail at Woodward. Back in the day, it was 2 hills with down rails, and then there was a landing, and then it went. There was kind of like a handicap rail with a kink in the middle of it. People who know Woodward will know that rail. I grinded that whole rail. I never made it all the way off the end. I made it very close to the end, but never off the end. I saw a clip somewhere, some point, some dude did it fully off the end and like jumped off the end. And the problem is the rail goes down and then it flattens out and then there's a kink and then it starts to actually go uphill and then curves around and then goes more up a hill.
Oh, wow.
So to get all the way off the very end, you really got to be cooking. And the support bars, like you were talking about at John's Rail in Austin, the support bars are bent. So like the rails like this and the supports aren't under the rail, but like to the side of the rail like that. So if you were trying to boost around that corner, you'd have to be leaning in quite a bit.
Which sounds very sketchy.
Yeah, like if you clip your foot, it's just going to throw you head first into the other supports. But some dude did it. It wasn't. I want to say it was Josh Petty, but I don't think it was. It was some camper. But I definitely did that rail all the way till it's more than halfway up the uphill part. People who know that rail will know what I'm talking about.
I remember that rail from the old videos.
Yeah. I don't know for long. I mean, Tracor is pretty long. That's 50 stairs.
It's a really long rail, and it's fatter than usual.
I don't know. I feel like I've done some long ass handicap rails, but I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Since we're on the section of influential tricks, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment because I put you as one of my choices for influential tricks, and that's one. And that trick is the torque sole, which I know you hate being pigeonholed as the torque sole guy, but you definitely have the best torque soles in the game, which have inspired a lot of skaters, such as Smiley in Colorado.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say. I appreciate that. I like the way I do them. There's a number of people who I think also do them pretty well. There was a clip that Lonnie had of me. What's the rail? Or there's a skate park there now in Austin, and it used to just be a park. It was called Mabel Davis.
Yeah, Mabel Davis.
Mabel Davis has a rail. It's a handicap rail. It's high, like nipple fucking high, armpit high. And I did a torque sole on that in my K2 250s. And the way Lonnie shot it, when I torque sole around the curve part, I'm actually below the rail. Like I'm leaning so far into it, the way that he's filming, my entire body from this vantage, from low, is fully underneath the rail. Because I was like completely sideways going. It's a real tight curve. And I did that in another one of Lonnie's videos in a pair of USD thrones that were too big, like size 12, and so they were kind of floppy on my feet, and the landing was really shitty. That was a good one. I don't know that would have influenced anybody to do anything, but it was a good trick.
Well, one of my favorite torque soles you did would have been on Dallas Kink in San Diego when you came out there.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm loading that up here in a minute, and we can watch it. In the meantime, Smiley has a question for you.
Oh, shit. I need to catch up on the chat.
Explain.
You can chat from this window, right? Not from the... I have to go to YouTube?
You can chat from the window that you're in right now. Explain why True Soyal is one of the best tricks.
Oh, well, number one, it's the best trick. Explain why True Soyal is one of the best tricks. So it's not one of the best tricks. It's the best trick. To me, to me, the warm-up trick for that is what I would call a true spin royale. Other people would call it hurricane frontside royale, maybe, or something like that, or in spin 360 royale. To me, that's the easier of the two. And the True Soyal, it's number one, it's totally blind. Number two, it's a spin and a grind, and it's a blind spin, and it's a hard trick to make look good, but it's also an easy trick to make look exquisite if you do it right, where the feet just come in and meet perfectly into the rail and tuck in. It feels like a very fluid motion. And when done correctly, it looks, I think, exquisite. So it's hard. It's technically hard. It's blind. It's and I think it's rare as another thing.
Yeah, two soil is not a trick you see too often.
Because it's fucking dangerous. That's why you miss, and you're either gonna bust your butthole, your nuts, or wreck your shin, or you're gonna get tangled up and wind up hitting your face on the ground. It's an easy trick to get body slammed by, and for that reason, it's scary, and for that same reason, you don't see it very often because
one trick you see a little bit more than that, which I would say is a close contender, would be the true kind grind.
True kind grind is another trick like that, where if you are not ready for business, you are going to get flexed in a real way. True kind grind is probably what I would say central to the canon of what true spin is, meaning like it is a full 180 or 270 blind side spin onto a top side grind. And like to go back a second to contrast, true topsoil is really, in my mind, like on the fringe of what counts as true spin, because it's really just backside, and most people do it the same way they would do a backside royale. And so getting credit for doing a true spin on something that's really just a backside royale, which a lot of us have been doing for 25 years now. I don't feel like if there was a meter that ran how central to how fringe, true topsoil seems a little bit more fringe to me because it's not really a true spin. It is a true spin. I'm not arguing that it's not. It is a true spin, but it's not as much of a true spin. Whereas a true kind grind is a full 270, blind 270 to a backwards topside trick, and it's deadly because either foot can miss and then you're going to get flexed on the rail or the stairs or whatever.
You there, Frank?
Yeah.
My internet went out momentarily.
I thought you were just zoning out.
No, my internet sucked. I need to call my ISP and have them check the wire because it seems like it's going out at least.
It was so from my perspective, you went like this, and then just like it froze frame, so it looked like you were deep in contemplation about.
That's funny.
About true KGs.
Hopefully, it picked up your audio the whole time.
Yeah, well,
we'll see when I watch it later. But I had that clip up of you doing the soyal. Let's watch that real quick. Sorry, not soyal. Torxel forward it's just a torxel. So it's a alley soyal.
Yeah.
And here it is. And that's and that was Punk Rock Frank.
Yeah. What's a shame about that? The angle is really good for the first 3/4 of the trick, but I tim the rail really bad by like 4 feet or more. But if you go to that rail in real life, the last like 5 or 6 feet of it hooks way off to the left, and anytime you see somebody grind that rail through the dick at the end, it's really impressive because that rail, as you're going down it, it hooks off to the left pretty severely. And the thing that I didn't know when we got there, even before I'd skated and jumped on it the first time, was that the rail is like male and female sections that connect together. It's not a continuously welded bar. And so I jumped on Torxel the first time, made it to the first kink, and like it it just hooked my Nugan foot and just body slammed me into the grass. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I fell like flat on my face, like slid down, like I was sliding for home, because I didn't even know that it wasn't a curved rail.
Right.
I mean, that goes to show how little I looked at the rails before I
Yeah.
jumped on them.
So yeah, that's a clip I filmed with Frank back then. One thing I wanted to bring up real quick is you said something just now that probably no one understands, and you said you timmed the rail.
Oh, yeah.
Explain what that is, and I'll be right back as you give that explanation.
Okay, so way back in the day in Austin, Texas, there was a rollerblader whose name was Tim Dale, and he would have been, according to Jan's count from earlier, he would have been a first generation Austin rollerblader. He skated with Mike Shields and Jason Howard and all those dudes, and John Sarzinski and all the other guys from way back, like early 90s, before my time. Anyway, Tim Dale was famous for jumping pretty far down the rail, grinding like the middle part, and then just dive bomb jumping to the bottom and landing on his feet. That's sort of like how he went about grinding rails. There's a clip someone else will know where Haffey grinds the middle section of like a 12 or 15 or whatever stair rail, but it's capped, and he grinds just the part in between the two caps and jumps to the bottom. And Tim Dale used to grind like that, like by design, I guess, where he would really only grind the middle section and then just heave it to the bottom. And he always did that. I don't remember ever seeing him come off the end of the rail. And so in Austin, our skate lingo included the verb to tim something, which is to tim a rail, meaning to grind however far and then just jump all the way to the bottom from, halfway up or 3/4 down or wherever, but significantly before the end of the rail. It wouldn't have been until Lonnie and Jan started getting a lot more fussy about whether the tricks counted. And Lonnie, I in my mind, you can speak to this, Jan, but in my mind, Lonnie was a lot more vocal, let's say, about whether a trick counted or not, based on whether you grind all the way through the dick or whether you jumped off too early or shit like that. Do you think that Lonnie was more vocal or more militant?
He might have been more militant back then. I don't really remember.
Okay.
I mean, he had more attitude.
Yeah, well, that might be a less polite way to say it.
Lonnie's a great guy, though.
No, at 100%. And to be fair, Lonnie and you and other people, Eddie Rubio for that matter, filming me and saying whether or not something counted, as far as the conversation we're having about influential tricks, that would have been massively influential to me to set it in my mind that you have to grind the entire length of the grindable surface in order for it to count. So if the rail just ends, flat, chopped off at the end in a pre-ADA context, then that counts. After the ADA, which was 94 or so, you have the standardization of handrails, and most handrails, well, all handrails in the US are required to have 12 inches of clearance before the stairs start or stop. And so that's why they always weld those little P shapes on the end of the rail, which in our parlance, we always call the dick of the rail. So that's that extra bit welded to the end is to give the 12-inch clearance that's required by the law. And that's why those things exist, because otherwise you wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to put that on there. But as far as influence, that would have been a huge influence for me personally, just having people like Lonnie and you around to say, no, you didn't grind all the way off the end, it doesn't count. That really changes your perspective of it changed my perspective of what counts as a trick in skating. That a description of it would be something like I said a second ago, which is you have to grind the entire grindable surface, with the exception of whatever part of the beginning you skip over, just based on how fast you're going and how high you jump up at the top.
I mean, that was definitely, a big factor filming in San Diego. Film for these videos, trying to make them. You're trying to make some better videos out there at the time. You want to have everybody do perfect tricks, and then the skaters at that time want to do perfect tricks. So when I go back to the vault series and I watch clips, people do something like 12 times, and today you could, almost every one of them is a good landing. You could count them, but they just weren't perfect enough. Almost,
Yeah.
And that was a thing. Now we are 45 minutes into this, and we're on one topic so far, and we had a bunch of topics we want to discuss. So, do we want to keep on this topic, or do we want to move on to another one?
Let me just name off the rest of mine. So I have this list: Dave Kalash 244, the Roadhouse, the Big Royale we talked about. I wrote an article a long time ago about Jason Marshall doing the alley topside soul. That to me was probably the biggest game changer I ever saw. I saw the premiere of VG4 at Woodward that summer of '96, I guess it would have been. And everybody in the room was completely blown away. I was blown away. They knew ahead of time it was going to be a big deal. They put it in the centerfold of the little booklet that came with the magazine. That I've said elsewhere, it was a big game changer for me. That like in the VG booklet that came with the video, they called it a blindside alley 270 alley oop to revert or something weird. Like it didn't even say soul grind, and it certainly didn't say alley topside soul grind. But we would all recognize that now as an alley top soul. That to me was a total game changer. It was really the first fully backwards topside trick I ever saw that conceptualized backwards and topside at the same time. Because to me, there were tricks like kind grind, where it's really just a kind of a fancy front side. If you think about what your body is doing, your body goes straight to the rail. It's not really a backwards alley-oop grind. It's a backwards topside grind, whereas alley fish, alley top horn, alley top soul, alley top acid, those feel like backwards topside tricks. So that to me was a big deal. Pretty much every trick that Pat Lennon did in Leading the Blind, it was a game changer.
And let me interject with that real quick.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I have a couple clips of Pat that are game changing from this video. Let's check these out real quick.
Yeah, so, bro, that fucking elevator shaft clip, like, we can come back to that if we make it to the topic of whatever one of the other topics was. I mean, that to me, oh, maybe it's the next one, the quantum leaps. Like, no one's ever done anything like that before. I mean, Ty Chris did some gnarly shit where he, like, landed on styrofoam, and there've been big tricks on the mega ramp, but like that's death. Like that's actual death. You fuck that up, and there's so many opportunities to fuck that up. You can trip and fall down the hole, or you could clip your head, which would be the worst possible case scenario, because then you're tumbling through the air as you fall to your death. I mean, you could just like there's 100 ways to die doing that.
Yeah, I mean it's insane. It is. And looking back at some of these tricks, I post a lot of these clips online, and most of them are 20 years old. And obviously, like, no one wore helmets back then. Today, some people wear helmets a little bit more, but I mean, you look at these tricks of like a helmet might have not helped tumbling to your death down the hole, but it would have helped your head before you tumbled to your death down the hole.
Yeah, so then you just be aware that you're falling to your death instead of knocked unconscious, and your unconscious body hurls to the ground before it's shattered into pieces like a piece of glass.
Let me give a shout out real quick to Remy. Remy's in the house. Good to see you, my friend. And I think he's on the same page as everyone else when he says Pat is a beast.
Yeah. I mean, beast. I don't know. A beast is fine enough to put us in the ballpark, but like that was inhuman rollerblading, that section of Pat's. I mean, No, as far as I'm concerned, nobody ever laid down the gauntlet like that.
Uh-oh. We've got wait, hold on. We've got porn chat in the
Oh, nice.
Let me block these people. Block users. All right, gone. Okay, sorry to interrupt you on that, Frank.
All good. Absolutely death defying, and like more than half the tricks in that section are death defying.
It's insane, and you know we're gonna talk about this later, but that section is one of the best sections ever made in blading, in my opinion.
Yeah.
As well as the video. Now, we're going to go to that in up here shortly. You on your list, you had a few more influential things. We had Arlo. What else was there? Arlo's Eisenberg.
Arlo doing the Blue Beast on the MTV rollerblading special was interesting, not because it was so impressive. You know, I've done rails bigger than that. Lots of people have done rails bigger than that. But like to present his like journey to find the rail, do the rail, you know, get broke off on the rail and get it done was the first time I'd ever seen anybody present a kind of narrative for a single trick. Like, we're going to get in the car, we're going to drive to the place, we're going to do the thing, and, you know, it's going to be hard to do the thing, and you're going to get hurt, you're going to get thrown on the ground, et cetera, and then hopefully at the end, you're able to actually get it done. I'm super jealous, and this is a side note. There's a Thrasher magazine video channel called My War, and it's about some particular dude going to some particular spot, sometimes for days, weeks on end, to do some particular trick. And I wish somebody in rollerblading would do that. And I more than that, I wish that we would have come up with the idea first, because I think it's a really important part of rollerblading. It's one of my favorite parts of rollerblading, is to set your mind to do something and just kill yourself over and over and over and over to get it done. Now, going back previously with Pat's tricks, that's a totally different kind of skating, because you only get one shot at it. If you fuck that up, that you're dead probably. You know, my scale of skating isn't death defying, but is the kind of skating where I may fall down hard 20 times and have to pull myself up and make myself do the trick. That is probably the single most enjoyable and fulfilling parts of rollerblading to me. And I've been skating that way at whatever my capacity has been the whole time. And I'm not one of the kind of people to go out and get wrecked really bad, break my leg, break my back, whatever. But hitting my shin really hard 20 times in a row in the same place, that counts to me as a commitment, you know? But yeah, so the Arlo in that MTV special doing the Blue Beast was the first time I'd seen sort of validation from my point of view, where you set out to do a thing, you go, you do the thing, you win the day, champagne all around or whatever. That was the first time I saw that. So I don't know if other people saw that the same way I did, but I take that to be pretty influential as far as my own skating. And then to round out that list, there was a 50-50 ad with Julio in camo pants doing a fish brain on a brick ledge that would have been in like Daily Bread 6 or 7 or 8 would have been when I started watching or reading Daily Bread. And that was the first like fully topside crazy town topside trick I ever saw. And I imagine that most people who were around my same time, that would have been their first real topside trick. Because not only is it a ledge, which means you can't cheat, it's also brick, which means if you miss, you're just going to destroy your shin. And then obviously, you know, Tom Fry doing the first fish brain. Same thing with Chris Edwards. That first grind isn't really all that much to write home about. Tom Fry did a lot of really good fish brains. He invented the trick. It's named for him, et cetera, et cetera. But lots of people have done far more impressive fish brains since Tom stopped skating, or started skating for that matter. And then I would also mention, for a lot of people, Josh Latona doing all the negative tricks. That would have been hugely influential to people. And then just another one of my personal favorites, I think it was maybe VG8 or so. Brian Jaggers jumps from like one parking lot to another like staircase landing, and he jumps over this rail and has to just slide to a stop. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a trick that didn't have all three parts. It didn't like a normal trick is, the run up, the trick, and the landing. And that was the first time anybody had ever put a trick in a video where there was a run up and a trick and there was really no landing. Not because they cut film, but because there was nowhere for him to land. He only had 10 feet to land, and he's hauling to jump over this gap that's, probably a story or two up. So yeah, that was my list. That's what I came up with on
That's very similar to the Eanes rail in Austin, where it's a really nice approach, a really nice rail, and then just a gravel landing.
Just dirt at the bottom.
I have a shorter list, and these are just kind of, I thought were influential for myself back in the early days. Was backslides. Not a lot of people were doing them stylish, and the first two people I remember doing them really stylish that inspired me were Steve Thomas and Jason Marshall.
Yeah.
And Steve Thomas was from Minnesota, I believe. Another person from his same crew that was very influential to me or influential to the sport more per se, would be Shane Nelson, because he was the first guy to do really big rails.
Yeah.
Kick rails, long rails. Just, he went big. Everyone else was doing little small rails, and Shane Nelson was just doing the biggest rail he could find and lacing it with his, barely locked in a soul grind on lightning.
Oh, yeah. The toe coming up.
Yep. And then a little later, but not much later, I think the first section where all the skating I felt was influential and groundbreaking would have been John Elliott's section in Wasteland.
Interesting. I haven't seen that video in a long, long time. I don't know that I could. I remember it. That's when he started wearing like a collared shirt with like black, like a white. I imagine him as like wearing a white collared shirt and like big baggy black cargo pants.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think he was more. It was before his cargo pant phase. It was before the Jethro phase. It was like a different John. It was like a more clean cut.
Okay.
John.
Yeah.
And you saw it in like mind game videos and 4x4 and everything later on, or razors. It was that it would have been the quantum leap section for him. Okay. Going from that era of John, just moving to the States from Austria, coming from his missionary upbringing, moving to California, and then finding his niche in music and style, which you saw later in Razor's videos and Mind Game.
Yeah.
All that stuff. And that's the next topic we have is the quantum leaps.
Uh-huh.
And if you want to kind of give an introduction to quantum leaps and what it means to you and what we're going to talk about, I'll give you the table for a second. I'll be back shortly.
Okay. To me, the quantum leaps as a topic is, dealing with the big changes, the almost like era defining changes, I guess I would say, in rollerblading. A lot of the tricks that we just covered speak to those same kinds of conceptual leaps, I think, that to me at least are really interesting to look at the historical, context of these big changes taking place. Just I guess just to get started, the grinding would have been, the first major conceptual leap that we would have made. And then I think Royale tricks constitutes its own kind of quantum leap, where in my mind, VG3 kind of marks the beginning of modern skating, which is, I think a lot of people would probably disagree with that, but the framework or the foundation had been laid for all the tricks to exist. Maybe as soon as you get the concept of a Royale, so you get backslide, you get mistrial, you get unity, through I get maybe a secondary leap or a half leap, you get Dugan and Nugan tricks. It doesn't provide a basis for negatives per se, but That I don't know. Maybe that would be a different thing altogether. But grinding it all would be the first quantum leap. I mean, the very first has to be you got these things that are made for skating on the sidewalk, and now you can do tricks on them. You can jump over shit. You can ride on stairs. You know, that would have been the first conceptual leap. The second would have been grinding it all. And then the third, I'm saying, is probably the idea of a boot down royale. In my sort of historical recollection, a royale was when you jump on proper boot down from the instant you put your foot on the rail. And in our local parlance, shifty would have been like a front side to royale. Other people called shifty just to mean royale, and that's a separate conversation.
I always understood shifty as a front side, your feet bent, but not touching.
Oh, rail. Really?
Like never actually getting to royale. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of like
an outside edge grind.
An outside edge grind
with no.
When I saw some early shifty royale photos and stuff, that's what they were like. They weren't really a royale, and they weren't really a front side. They were like this in between.
Yeah, like two outside edges, but not boot.
Yeah, like you would do in hockey skates.
Yeah, like a set slide. But the thing is, with a set slide, unless you're doing a wheel slide, a set slide is boot down. Like a royale is boot down.
But now in like big wheel blading and stuff, it's wheel slides, so it's kind of.
Yeah, because if you were doing that in 110s, you'd break your leg, right?
No, people do that in 110s.
No, I mean boot down.
Oh, boot down. Oh, well, unless you're Tree.
Yeah, well, that's
Rudolph. He can do that in any skate.
That's probably true. He's probably more the exception than the rule. I think most people doing it in 110s would be doing a hockey stop the way we all used to do it in our Bauer hockey skates, where you're sliding on your wheels for the purpose of stopping rather than for the purpose of grinding a flat surface, for lack of a better word.
I just want to interject real quick into the live chat. Some funny comments. Every time you light a cigarette, it compels me to lighten my joint. And Remy says, Max, Frank's already got me lighting up. And Launder, I'm packing a bowl because of Frank.
Excellent. There's a narrow chance that my mother is watching this, in which case I prefer not to be chain smoking cigarettes. And this is still the first cigarette that I've had since the beginning. Before my mom was like, I guess, following you on Facebook, she wasn't getting word of these things, so I could smoke with total impunity. But if you're watching, Mom, sorry.
Hi, Mrs. Stoner.
Yeah, right.
Here's Remy says, in DB, Chris Edwards did a shifty outside edges only. So that would go along with them probably calling it a shifty in Daily Bread, because that's what I remember reading shifty several times, and then shifty, and then they're calling it shifty royale, and then when you got your boot down, it finally like transitioned to royale. It was almost like a transitional trick, a slowly evolving trick from front side to shifty to royale.
Yeah. Well, I know that the Australians just called it a shifty, and that was what they called a royale. And there were other parts of the world where they just called it a shifty, and that was just the name of the trick. Same way that you and I would say royale, and they wouldn't count it as a shifty unless you had boot down, the same standard that we all have. I think separately, shifty. I mean, there was tons. This goes on forever. Like a whole podcast series could exist just talking about trick names and so on. I mean, there's people in New York who thought that a soul grind was called a Smith grind into like 97, 98 territory, which to me seems absolutely crazy because we had so much media. We had Box, we had Inline Skater, we had Daily Bread, we had 100 European magazines, 4x4 or no, what was it? 4 in a row already existed in Australia or New Zealand. Where
there was so many magazines at that point. I mean, you had all over Europe. I mean, you say they called it a Smith grind, a soul?
A soul grind in parts of New York City it was called a Smith grind.
I never heard anybody say that. Maybe from like
I think John Ortiz would have been my source on that.
Okay.
He called it a soul grind. He might have called it a Smith grind in the very beginning, but then switched to soul grind when everybody else did. But he told me at one point that there were still pockets of rollerbladers in New York calling it a Smith grind well into the late 90s.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever heard it. And Dave Quist says, this is like the first time you get to hang out with your uncles after Christmas dinner. So thank you, nephew Dave.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
I hope you had a good Christmas.
Yeah. Hope you got what you wanted from Santa. On that same note, though, I would say that people like Dave Payne and Angie Walton were both of a mind to say rollerblading trick names need to avoid commandeering names from other sports. So we shouldn't have a 50-50 like on a skateboard. We should have a front side, or we should call it something else. Most of the old grabs, mute grab, stale grab, Japan, all that, came directly from skateboarding or skateboarding through snowboarding, depending on the era. But both, and like same thing with the names for switch and regular. Switch and regular is what skateboarders call it. And so Dave Payne always had the unnatural section in the videos because he wanted to try to force rollerbladers to use non-skateboarding language, which I really appreciate. I probably didn't even recognize it at the time. In my mind, it would have been, in VG, the switch section is called unnatural. In T-Bone, the switch section is called no bitch, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They had bitch and no bitch, which is like way too New York for me, It's too like unnecessarily potty mouth. And it isn't helpful in understanding. The idea that you're doing something left-handed or left-footed or right-footed or whatever, and indicating that that's the hard way, the unnatural way, the switch stance way, doesn't really communicate. In linguistic terms, I would call that an unmotivated term, meaning that the hearer of the new term, it doesn't automatically make sense. I was probably way closer to my age now than I was when I would have been watching those early T-Bone videos with no bitch sections, that I would have even understood that that's what they were talking about. You didn't put, I don't remember you ever putting switch sections or unnatural.
No, never. No, I only had fall sections. It would have been the only thing. No switch sections.
What was your objection to that?
Line section, but that was it. Now I want to ask you one thing. You going back a little bit was the front side grind. You said naming it front side instead of 50-50, but in skateboarding it's still front side 50-50 and back side 50-50, so it's still similar to skateboarding.
Yeah, well,
backside,
front side and backside are what I would call architectonic terms, meaning that they apply to almost all the action sports. So you're going to get front side and backside turns originating in surfing, which I have a lot less problem borrowing from surfing since that's really the sort of first action sport. They would have come up with the idea of naming a spin by its degrees of rotation.
Mm-hmm.
So a 180, a 360, a 540 on a surfboard would be more or less unthinkable. But the surfers, started that convention of naming a spin jump by naming the degree of rotation. And then, to me, rollerbladers kind of took that off axis a little bit and started producing 270 backside royale, 450 when you 540 the short way over a hip, 630 when you 540 the long way over a hip. That's kind of like getting a little bit too math nerd for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like anybody. So here's a $20 term. $20 term is phenomenological experience. If I'm doing a 630 over a hip, I'm not doing 90 less than a 720. I'm doing a 540. My phenomenological experience is that I'm doing a 540. When you add up the math of it, yes, technically it's 630 degrees of rotation. But like a 630 and a 540 aren't different tricks to me. It's just that it's just by virtue of the fact that you're going over the long way over a hip that you get that extra 90 degrees. So that's I don't know. The convention, kind of goes off the rails at that point when you're getting into degrees of 90 degrees.
I feel like that with like 360 Royale or calling it 450 Royale.
Yeah.
It's like some people are adamant it's a 360 Royale, some people are adamant it's a 450 Royale. I mean, whatever, it's sick, but I can
there's
both ways, but
there's two sides of that coin to me. One is, yes, it absolutely makes sense because you're rolling this way and you're eventually going to be grinding, this way. And so you're never going to have the only 360 you could do would be 360 Machio, 360 X grind, if you really want to be a pain in the ass about it. But the other side of that to me is almost no one rides straight. Let me try to line up with my camera. No one rides straight up to the rail and does full 360 and then lands, Soul or Machio on the rail as if you were doing neutral 360 X grind down a rail. No one does that. And so when you're going to nitpick about the degrees, people carve in at an angle to sort of cheat their way. Now, a hurricane, I think, is less than that, but the outspin way, people whoop their leg around to start that 450 spin. Some people worse than others. But like, at what point are you going to start accounting for that hangulation that you're getting there? So whatever. And to answer your question though, 50-50, front side 50-50 or backside 50-50, you're right, and that is borrowed from skateboarding because there's no way to 50-50 a wave if you're a surfer. But just getting rid of the idea that it's a 50-50. What is that comment?
This is from Mark Hoyce. Does Frank remember when we chatted about the German hunt for precise naming with frontside being too vague, so we desperately needed the 50-50?
Oh, yeah, I do remember talking to Mark about that. I guess he just put his name backwards.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a blast from the past. Mark. Howdy, buddy. Been a long time. Yeah. I can easily conceive of other languages, German included, having to borrow from terms invented from rollerbladers in Southern California or Iowa or wherever the fuck the rest of those Midwest dudes were from, being a real challenge to take foreign words and involve them in the grammar of your own language, or a non-English language, I should say. 50-50, it makes sense. I don't have any violent disagreement with it being a 50-50, other than in my old age, I agree with Dave Payne and I agree with Angie that we should, if possible, avoid skateboarding tricks, probably in particular skateboarding, just because there's so much tension between those two communities. But I also will readily admit that there are some body motions that we need to describe in the course of coming up with language for rollerblading and whatever, that are going to be architectonic, that are going to just transcend all the action sports. So a 360 on a skateboard, on a bike, on a scooter, on ice skates, on a snowboard, on skis, anything that you could think of as action sports, snakeboard for that matter, it's architectonic, meaning it spreads across the tectonic plates of all these different domains. It's an arch term, the way that evolution is an arch term, meaning you can talk about evolution in terms of biology, or you can talk about evolution in terms of rollerblading or cell phone technology. Anything that's generational change based can be described in terms of evolution. So evolution is another architectonic term. Naming degrees of a spin is an architectonic term that probably would have started with surfing. Certainly would have got a jump start from BMX, because those guys were doing 360s and 720s way back. I mean, Jan, you might be able to speak to that. When was the first 720 on BMX? In the 80s?
Oh, I have no idea, to be honest with you.
Do you think it could have been earlier than the 80s?
I mean, Matt Hoffman was the one pushing all those, big stuff, and it was, most of that stuff would have been late 80s, early 90s, probably all the
Yeah.
big BMX stuff that went down.
Yeah,
I wanted to, on like skateboard naming. The only thing I really remember using as far as skateboard naming when we were in Austin skating was using the term half cab and full cab.
Yeah.
And we use that quite a bit, or at least I did. And I still use it sometimes, but not to the extent that I did before.
Yeah.
You ever use those terms?
I do. I fuck it all up too. I'll say in cab and out cab and shit like that because it makes sense to me. If I were speaking in public, I would try to say something like fakey in spin soul instead of half cab soul. But just for economy, cab soul. Like if I'm skating with other people and we're naming tricks, hey, try this, try that, whatever. Which is another fun part of rollerblading is just, getting together with the guys and, trying to egg each other into doing certain tricks and whatever.
Well, my favorite thing in Austin in the past, my last time there, 2012 to 2017, was going to House Park on our morning skates and playing horse with everybody there. And we would spend like an hour or an hour and a half warming up, just playing horse on like the small curb or like the lower on the ledges or whatever.
Yeah.
And then throwing out all the trick names. That's when you use all the trick names because
well, and that's to me where the kind of the rubber meets the road, right? Because if I say out cab, if I'm talking to you, I think that you're going to get that means, right shoulder fakie, spin the long way to right foot soul grind or whatever. Rather than specifying what's true or what's right, I think you have to go with what works. So if I'm playing a game of horse with you or a game of blade or whatever, whatever language that you and I can use to communicate what we're trying to model is what's best. So you and I grew up saying half cab. So if I told you, let's do half cab macchio, and you said, okay, you're going to go and do it exactly how I imagined it, rather than something totally different. So I do, it does bother me that it's a half caballerial is what it's called from Steve Caballero. But I don't know. I've kind of put that in the category of, pick my battles,
Mm-hmm.
I wish mute was not called mute. There is a phenomenon where languages spontaneously produce the same word for things. There's some obscure language in the middle of nowhere that uses the word dog for dog, the way that, canine, like you and I would say. And the languages and language families aren't connected at all. I wish I could produce off the top of my head what the language is or where the people are from, but it's totally unrelated that these two groups of people decided to call this animal a dog. And there's no influence. These people wouldn't have had contact with each other. And in my mind, mute is kind of like that. A mute air comes from skateboarding. But I don't know that anybody who learned that term back in the early days would have recognized it as a skateboard term. And it made sense. In my mind, it makes sense. Its linguistic motivation is the idea that when I jump over a jump box and there's a moment in the air where I pause and pull my feet in, it like mutes the world. And that's how I imagine the trick term making sense, that like there's a moment at the top, at the pinnacle of your jump where time stands still for just a moment,
right,
as if you'd hit the mute button. And so it made sense to me that way. And it's a shame that it winds up being a skateboard term, because like Dave said and like Angie said, it's better to avoid that and make our own thing from scratch as much as possible. And I think to whatever extent they would have acknowledged that architectonic terms like 360 for a full spin or front flip or back flip is just pervasive across all action sports. So I don't know. I lost what the question was.
Well, we're gonna move on from that question, and I wanted to say that recently I've been posting a bunch of shorts on YouTube, more for the general public to, watch some clips and stuff. And initially, I was posting, like Chris Haffey 360 Royale, or whatever the trick names are, half cab, solo, whatever. And I'm looking at it from like a normal person, like reading the title. It's just a bunch of words, so you have no idea what they mean.
Yeah.
Like if you skate, you know what it means, but if you read like a description of a skate trick, like hurricane topsoul, 540 out. What does that, to like a random person? What does that even mean? It's just a bunch of words there. So it's kind of funny, like trying to figure out naming things to where they can relate to not just skaters, but also to outside of skating.
You got to double down on that shit, Jan, because one of the things that will make people feel like a member of the community is knowing the discourse of our community. So if you see that and you're just a regular person and you see it because it's got 1 million views on YouTube, and for some reason the algorithm served it up to you, like, okay, well, whatever. I don't care what these guys say in their own language what it is. I care the guy did a crazy thing on a handrail and it looked crazy, but one of the things that's most important to identity formation is language, and using the discourse of a particular community is what makes you feel like you belong to that community. And that's one of the reasons why all these different, number one, languages exist, A, and B, particular jargon is used for all these different action sports, because it's a way of separating our identities as rollerbladers from a skateboarder identity or some kind of generic action sports identity or scooter or BMX or whatever. Like, because we have our own language, we feel like we're our own people. So I would say, call it like you see it. If it's a hurricane topsoul and that's how you call it that. Everybody else needs to learn how you talk, because, you're one of the grandfathers of rollerblading, in my mind, and in many other people's mind, I would think too. So the way that you talk matters to the rest of us in the community, because you're out here making podcasts, you're out here representing, you're the one who needs to be teaching this language to all these people who may be just spying it off on YouTube once in a while. So it's your job, Jan.
Well, one thing, I've with this channel, we've been focusing a lot on the past with the interviews, and the channel itself. I have new content when I go to events and stuff like that. But what I really want to focus on with the podcast is also bringing in the newer generations. Like on Thursday, I'm going to be interviewing Lorik Picard. He's 18 years old, lives in Montreal. He's from Switzerland. He won the Blading Cup amateur contest like 2 years ago, rode for Icon, now rides for Rossi's. He's from the new generation, and he's 18. He's young enough to be most of the people probably watching this is a kid,
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a disconnect between people in our generation and the younger generation, as well as a disconnect from them to us. Most of those kids don't know anything about the history of rollerblading or our era. I mean, they were born. I mean, Lorik was born the year Leading the Blind came out. So, when you think about that, that's pretty crazy. He missed like obviously everything before that, and most of the things, after that for a short amount of time. So I want to start connecting more with the younger generations and interviewing some of them and hearing their perspective on things like trick names. Like, are they even calling it the same names? Like, do they have their own lingo? So that's kind of what I would focus on. Obviously, I love doing the throwback interviews with all the classic skaters and people in my life, but I definitely want to reach out to some of these younger guns and kind of help, unite the generations a little bit more. I think that's important. Now, the last topic we were on was quantum leaps, and we completely went off topic on that.
Yeah,
so naming and stuff like that. And you did a good summary of what quantum leaps were. We had some examples from quantum leaps, like videos from when you were watching the early rollerblade videos that were just skating stairs, and Chris was doing his first rail. There was more slap, moving into a video like Dare to Air, which would have been the first video with like extreme skating, which would have been a quantum leap. And like VG2 to VG3. Like, how would you explain that quantum leap?
Oh yeah, well that I covered that when you went to the toilet or whatever.
Okay.
The quantum leap would be from pre-royale or pre-boot down tricks to post-boot down tricks. That would be an example of a quantum leap. Another big one would probably be something along the lines of the VG7 era, where I think that video was like Mediocrity or something like that, Mediocrity, where like the landscape of rollerblading totally changed to where it was. You used to have a funny joke about how many skateboarders does it take to do a trick? One, but it takes 100 tries. How many rollerbladers does it take to do a trick? One, but it takes 6 to film it.
Right. That was my go-to joke.
Yeah. So that era was like we would just go skate just in town with no video in mind, and there'd be 3 people filming the trick as if we're some Hollywood production with like multiple cameras. I mean, there's TV shows that only use 2 cameras, like Friends. Friends was a TV show that used 2 cameras. And you've got some kid doing a front side on a 9 stair with 4 different people filming it,
There's a video cover like that. I believe it was some video, maybe Doug's videos, where the cover is just like a guiding rail and 10 people with cameras and photo cameras around it. And you saw that so much at like IMYTAs. Everyone's filming. I mean, even today, it's more understandable because everybody has a phone, they can film. But back then, everyone had like a camcorder, and a photo camera just up.
Yeah, but the phone everybody has anyway. If you weren't a rollerblader, you would. I mean, my mom, your mom, everybody's mom has a phone. But back in the day, if you had a camera, you had to go out of your way to get the camera.
Mm-hmm.
Not the least, you had to get batteries, charge the batteries, have tapes, have VCRs or some computer set up to edit the stuff. I mean, it was a totally different kind of commitment than like me standing here with my phone. Oh God, look, that kid's gonna jump off that thing. Totally different. So that would be one of those quantum leaps, I guess, or maybe just a cultural shift. One of the last quantum leaps, I would say, to come back to it, would be Leading the Blind, where, for better or for worse, I think a lot of people might have watched Leading the Blind and been like, well, I'm done. There's no way I'll ever be as good or crazy as these guys. I'm done skating,
And I think that actually happened.
It may have, yeah. I mean, I think with the resurgence of people coming back, like Lawrence, for instance, is still trying to learn topsoul on a quarter pipe. He can do it sometimes, and other times he's got to work harder at it, or he didn't get it that day or whatever. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people like him who have come back to blading in their later years because it's welcoming now.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like the attitude used to be, look, if you can't hang with Pat Lennon, you need to fuck off, or sit down at least, and let the big boys do their thing, which we didn't necessarily realize at the time, but that must have been really off-putting to a huge number of people, because the number of people rollerblading now is way more than there were, let's say, 10 years ago, or certainly 15, 17 years ago, 18 years ago, when Leading the Blind came out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would have quit. You had two ways. You had like quitting right at the tail end of the 90s. They were in that early thing. They were little kids, and who knows what happened. And then people who quit during that mid-2000s hammer skating period. And it wasn't just people who couldn't hang necessarily. It was people who were doing that skating too that just didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
They were getting too broke off. It was like just too much stress.
Or they got married, they went to college, they got a job, whatever,
Yeah, well, that's another. And then there's just people who can multitask. It always gets me. I know so many people who can do a lot of different things in life. They play music, they can skate, they can create art, whatever. But some people, they can only skate, and then they have to quit that to play music, and they have to quit that to do art, and they can't do 2 things at once. And I've seen that a lot in skating. And then eventually they go full circle, they come back into skating, and they quit everything else to get back into it.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take. I think that for people like that, you must have to go all in on something. Where if you're gonna spend all your money on guitars and amps and all that, you know, that's going to occupy your whole mind, and there's not room to think about what kind of frame should I be getting, how hard of wheels would I, you know, rather take to the skate park or go street skating with or whatever. I can easily imagine that it occupies too much space in the mind where you kind of can't multitask like you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know some people can't multitask in general. For me, for someone who excessively could multitask, like all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff, it's crazy that some people can't do two different things.
I'm going to say something controversial, and I think that I don't believe that multitasking exists. What I believe exists is the ability to remember the thing that you were doing before you got interrupted, and transition seamlessly from the thing to the thing you got interrupted back to the thing. That's to me what multitasking is. The idea of holding two thoughts in my head at once. I can't do that.
We've got someone who we've actually talked about a couple times on the show earlier is now in the live chat, and
I see
that's
him there.
free. And he says it's a culture of veterans well versed in activity. It's going to be very intimidating for newcomers.
Oh,
What do you think
yeah,
about that?
yeah, Tree, you're right on. I think that the overwhelming aspect of it is going to be probably pretty front and center. But you know, as somebody who goes to college to become a biologist, you know, you don't as an undergraduate necessarily recognize the gulf between you and the people who are doing biology as professional biologists. And you can say that about any discipline, whether it's rollerblading or professional mathematics or medicine, psychology, carpentry, you know, anything. Um, Carpentry, as an example, has a huge following on YouTube, where if you have never swung a hammer before in your life and you want to get into building stuff out of wood, you can go on YouTube and find 1,000 channels talking about what kind of hammer should you buy right off the bat, what kind of tape measure should you buy right off the bat, and really trying to welcome people in. Um, One of the things that rollerblading, I think, has fought against its whole life is how to do outreach and bring people in. You know, in my mind, the sort of Richie and Pam Velasquez model is to go all in on Woodward, get kids in as campers, and indoctrinate them into our activity that way. Um, the other end of the spectrum of that would be like the Brian Shima approach, which is just to act like you're so cool that anybody who wants to be as cool as you needs to just copy what you're doing. And I say that may sound a little bit harsh. I'm not intending for Shima to necessarily sound like an asshole, because I don't think that he is an asshole. I think he's a good guy. But it's one approach. You know, you make it look so cool that anybody would obviously want to do this just because of how cool it is. The kind of rock star approach, I guess, would be a better way to put it. Brian Shima comes to mind for having that kind of rock star approach. Arlo was probably similar. There's any number of approaches, but as far as, you know, getting younger people involved, I think we just kind of the advice should be to everybody do their own thing, and the people who are interested in approaching rollerblading from any particular vantage will find their in. You know, people who want to hear Grandpa Jan, you know, talk about how things were for, you know, since the earliest days.
Yeah, back when I had to walk to get my skates.
Yeah, uphill both ways. And don't eat no yellow snow. I think that the people who for whom Jan's approach resonates, they will find their way into our community through Jan. Any number of people won't resonate with Jan's approach, and they'll come in through the Richie and Pam Velasquez mode. And then other people still will come at it through the rock star Brian Shima approach. And so my suggestion, as ever, has always been we need more and embrace the differences and the diversity, because I wouldn't have got into rollerblading the way that I did if it weren't for other kids who looked like me and who talked like me and who played like me wanting to do it. So it seemed like this is somewhere where I fit in. Other people who come at it from a totally different vantage, a hip hop background, for instance, might see it totally differently, and they see a black dude tearing it up on the skates. They see Frankie Morales or anybody else for that matter, and they think that dude's rad. I want to be like that guy. And they look at this half an academic like me and think, fuck that guy. That guy's an idiot. So I don't know, Jan. Sorry, I totally wandered off the trail again.
Well, I think as far as like the rock star image, which was very big in the 2000s, and it wasn't just like people who listen to rock, whatever, but it was like these people, the skaters who were built up by brands through media to be almost like a god in some sort or something, like people have their pictures on their walls above their bed, like, and it was easier to create a rock star, image back then with print media, because you focused on ads, you focused on working with the magazines, getting in magazines. Magazines was a real big thing and advertising was a big thing for building the rock star skater back then, and that's changed now with the evolution of media. You don't have everything's like back. Like you look at skiing, for instance, which is it's a little bit different than skating, but it's kind of approaching that with skating now too. They don't have as many actual pro skiers anymore. Now they just kind of hook up these Instagram guys who have 1 million followers with some free skis, and they don't actually have to pay a bunch of people to be these big pros.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that on with rollerblading. If you look at some of the biggest Instagram accounts for skating, it's not necessarily a pro rollerblader. It's like some am that's pretty good, or they do some really cool urban skating. And they get hooked up by all the brands, but no one's getting, they're not really focusing on promoting them or paying them or anything like that. It's definitely changed a lot with that.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation, and that's a great transition into that topic. As far as how things have changed, can you name who do you think is the biggest Instagram channel or YouTube channel for that matter on rollerblading? There's okay. Josh Acosta. There's
there's some guy. There's a skater from New York. His Instagram's the Stuttering Skater. Have you seen him?
Nope.
He's a skater from New York. He has a stutter. That's why he goes by the Stuttering Skater. He's only been skating for a couple years. He does urban skating. He dabbles in aggressive. He dabbles in skiing. And he's good at doing his promotion. And he's got like 280,000 followers on Instagram.
280,000.
And you have some pros, who've sort of top in the game, who've been on there for years with 15,000 or something like that. I know Frankie's up there with a lot of followers. Some of the YouTube channels. I mean, you look at Jump Street. They've been doing their podcast for quite a while. It's really good. They've kind of maintained this 10,000 subscribers for the past year or so.
Okay.
And then you have some random kid. This kid Samir. He lives in, I'm not sure what country. I believe in India, and he's got like 280,000 followers on YouTube, and he just does like stair rides and stuff. So it's really about today, not how good of a skater you are to promote for promotion wise. It's like how good are you promoting yourself? How good are you at like the algorithms? How good are you at getting yourself out there? And when you do that, when you have 200,000 followers, it's pretty easy to message a company. Can I get skates? Can I get wheels? Hit up somebody like you who, which is Tree's favorite beverage, by the way, to get sponsored. And Tree's right. Like right now, Air Manatee, he's someone who's. Are you familiar with Air Manatee?
Was he Air Dolphin before?
No, Air Dolphin's different. Air Dolphin's the skater that wears all the
jinkos. Air Manatee and Air Dolphin.
Air Manatee does the backflips. He's like a kind of bigger guy, does backflips. I interviewed him on here.
Okay.
Worked one time. and he does all sorts of peak male performance. He does a lot of videos that attract to more than just skaters and are growing their pages, like really fast. So it's definitely a different. It's like the times have changed the way you market. It used to be we marketed a skater. Now a skater has to market themselves.
Right.
And if you're not good at marketing,
Right.
then you're going to be left in the dust, unless you know people. If you know people, if you have connections, that's always been that way. If you have connections, you can build yourself. But if you're just some random guy, it's not like you send a demo tape to 4x4 like back in the day, and we're like, damn, this kid's sick. Let's do this with him. That now there's a lot of really good kids on Instagram.
Yeah.
But it's this Instagram and even like stuff on YouTube, like skate videos and stuff. Once you see it once, it's like gone forever. You don't see it again. It's that video I sent you, Future. We'll discuss shortly, but we could get into that real quick. There's a video called Future. It came out this year. It's not very long. It's a video that has about 9 profiles of skaters, probably between like 17 and 19 years old from all around the world. And they're pretty good. It's a good video, but it was impossible for me to find it again. If you try typing in Future and then rollerblading, what comes up is rollerblading videos from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And nothing else. I actually had to go through an old email where somebody had sent it to me. Like, it was unsearchable. And that's another thing. You want to make sure you got keywords to search stuff, not just one word. I see a lot of YouTube videos where it's just like 1 or 2 words. You can't search them. Even like with groups, like I tell people, you have Facebook groups to build scenes. And if you're like in Austin, you have a Facebook group that says Austin rollerblading inline skating. People search Austin rollerblading or inline skating, they can find it.
Yeah.
Some people put like, A-Town, like rollerblades or something, something weird, or like they have Boston Blade Bonanza for Boston, but it has like sharp S's instead of B's. You can't search it or find anything, right? Yeah. So it's like with everything in social media, you have to like keywords and like, I don't know.
Well, I think the way to say that is if you're interested in quote unquote making a living, not necessarily actually, but making a space for yourself in those new media outposts, then that's what you have to do. Absolutely. I still consider myself a rollerblader, even though I skate 6 times a year. I consider coming on your show as part of rollerblading, for me at least. Anytime I talk to a rollerblader on Facebook or anywhere else in a real live human event, or online, it's all still part of rollerblading to me. But I'm far from the domain of, YouTube or Instagram or any of that as far as that world that exists. On the video, it's interesting to me to have watched that. The kids are good. Those dudes are pretty good at skating, and some of the tricks are really pretty awesome. There was a couple of big soul grinds and top soul grinds down pretty sizable rails that I thought was impressive. It kind of was a throwback in my own mind to the first time I did a rail that was more than 30 stairs, for instance, and I would have been pretty proud of myself. And you could see in their faces that they're proud to have accomplished a top soul down a 40 stair rail or whatever. That's awesome. Good for them. Good for them for finding out something that we've all found so enjoyable, and they're finding enjoyment out of it as well. And that's terrific. It does to me from my vantage look like those dudes are kind of existing in what I've called for 10 or 15 years now, like the blade apocalypse. Like they're living in a post-apocalyptic rollerblading landscape where if you're from some small town in Russia, you might be able to get your hands on a pair of rollerblades, but how would you know what to do with them once you had them? It just, I don't know. And it's also, there's that aspect of it where they may, despite the internet, despite everything else, they may not have a lot of access to people who've been in rollerblading for decades like you and I have. And then the other side of that is it's very, very distinctly meta modern in its character to me. I wrote an article for one magazine a long time ago talking about modernist rollerblading, postmodernist rollerblading, and meta modernist rollerblading. And beginning there, you'll know this. You probably know this, Jan. There was some video that came out that modeled itself on like old school 80s computer graphics. Does that ring a bell?
It does, but I don't remember. Maybe somebody in the live chat does.
There's a whole genre of that music and that. Oh, I'm unprepared. I shouldn't be making that. I shouldn't be bringing that up. But anyway, it feels very meta modern in that they're kind of negotiating in and around all these different. Was
it the Heat video?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so.
For me, the video, I'm just going to throw it out there, is I feel like some of those skaters are around older skaters just based where they're from.
Maybe they are.
And what I do like about the video personally is it's the first video I've seen of kids in that age bracket, only kids in that age bracket, since I'd say like the early 2000s, late 90s. Like there hasn't been a video of just young kids that are shredding in 20 years.
Yeah.
At least that I've seen. Maybe I'm sure I've missed some videos, but it's the first one I've seen like that. And I have a link to it in the description below, so you can go ahead and watch our video, hit the like button, support those kids, so we can see more footage from them. And they're from all over the world.
But like straight up teenagers. Like these kids are teenagers. Yeah.
And
that's cool. I mean, all of us who are here participating in this video in one way or another, we've been doing this for probably ages, all of us, and we have fallen in love with skating for our own reasons, some of which overlap with the rest of us. Oh, there's more porn, Jan, on the thing.
Really getting in here right now.
Anyway, everybody has come to it for their own reasons, and everybody's fallen in love with it for their own reasons. It's really nice to see that there are people younger than us who are taking up, the torch. And I think in large part, it's our job to support them in whatever direction they plan on taking rollerblading. Hopefully they'll stick around. It would be really rad to talk to one of those dudes from that future video 10 years from now when I'm fucking 50 and saying, yeah, I remember the time I talked to Jan about that on one of those podcasts. And them saying, yeah, that was the first time I ever soul grinded a 40 stair rail. That was super cool. It's cool that you guys saw that. However the conversation goes, we aren't going to be around forever to influence rollerblading in one way or another.
I'd like to get you on a show with one of those kids so you could pick their brains.
I would love to talk to one of those dudes.
And
I would just like to know, what do they know about rollerblading? And there's all these different periods of history where the past was totally forgotten, or the past is like worshipped, and those are kind of the extremes. You and I grew up in a world of rollerblading where there was nothing before us. There was almost nothing that had been done that we hadn't seen develop. We first would have started seeing Royales in magazines, then Unities and Top Acids, and then it would have been a couple more years before we started seeing True Spin Fishbrain, True Spin Kind Grind, crazy stuff, spin to win stuff, 900 to Kind Grind and shit like that. But we were there for all those benchmarks to have occurred. And it would be really interesting to me to find out what these younger guys know about the stuff that happened before. Is it just ancient history to them? Or do they have a sense of what happened in Australia at certain times, what happened in Europe in certain times, what happened in Japan in certain times, in Southern California? How would they describe the history of rollerblading as they have encountered it?
I feel like unless they're hanging out with a bunch of older people, that they're probably pretty oblivious to most things. And that's how, what Laura told me yesterday, before he moved to Montreal, he didn't know anything about skating was passed. And it's not like you can go to a centralized database, that shows all the history. You have to find the magazines because none of that stuff's online.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, you've probably heard of like Leading the Blind. Like if you're on Facebook or something, people post top 5 videos. There's a few videos that are always going to be mentioned. So you might have gone back and watched those. But my guess is very few of them probably know, maximum 10% or less of blading history.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, so they know 10%. What are the things that have made it through the ether to land in their mind and become part of this sort of patchwork of rollerblading history that they've encountered over the last however long they've been skating?
Yeah. I mean, my guess would be
you're probably right that the stuff that's online
seen on Facebook, or someone like Broskow who's still killing it.
Yeah.
They really love Broskow, so they go back and look at his works he's had in the past.
So mine for Broskow videos. So when
you have a skater like that who's been around for so long, that has had fans in almost every generation of blading, that's somebody who probably helps kids discover a little bit more history. I want to give a thank you real quick to Launder for a $2 super chat. Thank you. And Oscar for a $10 super chat. That's very cool. Thanks, guys. And going back to we said about YouTube and YouTube channels and things like that. Are you familiar with Braille skateboarding?
Yeah.
So Remy says that's the only one he follows because he's fucking blading. And someone else had said that all the Instagram kids, it was Remy again, go blade with Braille's skateboarding channel. And Braille is already big. They're very, I feel like, when they post best rollerbladers in the world and stuff like that, like, and they post a video of people skating in their park, they've like taken that term.
Yeah.
You could actually have a video of the best rollerbladers in the world. Not saying those guys are the best rollerbladers in the world, but it's not the best rollerblading happening in that video.
And certainly in that skate park.
In that skate park. And they're kind of appropriating our keywords for their YouTube channel and making a lot of money off of it. And I'm curious if they share anything with, when they get millions of views, if they share anything with the rollerbladers who are actually going there, other than giving them exposure to their own channels.
Yeah, I don't know. I watched some videos of that guy, Aaron Cairo or whatever his name is, a long time ago when he was still. Do you remember a guy? There was a dude in skateboarding like 1,000 years ago called Simon somebody, and he would famously like bolt skateboard trucks on the bottom of like ironing boards and surfboards and like go out and skate them. Simon somebody. He would dress like a clown in like a clown suit and go do, kickflip like trucks bolted to a surfboard and kickflip over a spine, like a 6-foot spine. Simon somebody, I can't remember. It was like 30 years ago almost. Anyway, that guy Aaron Cairo on the Braille skateboarding channel, he was doing shit like that a long time ago, like 10, 12 years ago on YouTube, just trying to catch views, and he had a series where people would send him something and he would bolt trucks to it and try to skate it and see if he could kickflip it or whatever.
Well, I think, I really love watching Tree doing that with skates. He builds all sorts of weird skate contraptions.
Yeah.
And skates them. And also there's that Ilya kid from Russia. He does some things like that too. But trees are really fun. He does them all the time. And he skates these weird, his thing where he buys some crappy old skates at the thrift store for $3, some rec skates, and just does crazy switch ups on rails on them.
Yeah.
Like pretty sure he did 244 rail on some rec skates.
Oh,
is
Jesus.
That correct, Tree? I believe so. And Tree says we gave a 22-year-old a curated skate video history lesson not long ago. He mostly only knew modern stuff, and I feel like that's probably about appropriate.
Yeah.
Dominic Sagona blew his mind, which looking back at old Dominic Sagona footage, it is mind-blowing the flow he has.
Uh-huh.
Skates, his style is flow. There's the only period of Dominic that which was short-lived, thankfully, is when he had his with his sleeve out and over.
Wearing half a shirt, yeah.
And when that was big, it was around 1999. I was in Europe that year, and not every kid, but a lot of kids were heavily influenced by Dominic and Dustin Latimer, but Dominic especially. Go to park and there would be like 5 kids with their shirts like that, like half on, like they just got up and like tripped or something.
Yeah. I mean,
amazing skater and super nice guy.
Fashion has always been kind of crazy, though. I mean, like you were talking about in the last podcast with the duct tape stuff. Part of that felt like it was just functional. My pants are tearing, so I just slap a piece of duct tape on there and I get through the day. Other people would make like a whole pairs of trousers out of duct tape, and that feels pretty ridiculous along the lines of wearing your shirt half on. But as far as the trends, and we don't necessarily need to cover this, but there have been so many different trends in rollerblading, some of which were cool, and I still think they're cool. Some of them are pretty embarrassing, and they'll always be embarrassing. At least from my vantage point. There's just been so many things. It would be interesting to talk about the difference between a trend and a fad.
Well, Frank, let me ask you this. So we're almost approaching 2 hours on this podcast, and we only covered half the topics we had. And I know you started a new job on Monday.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in doing a part 2 sometime at the end of this week?
At the end of this week. So I'm going to go camping this weekend. I don't know when yet. You mean like I could do Friday morning?
Yeah, I was thinking Friday. So like around this time Friday, or earlier?
Earlier than this would be better.
Okay. Well, why don't we do a part 2 Friday morning? Give me a time so I can tell everybody. Would work good for you.
What time do you get up?
I mean, I get up, whenever.
Can we do what would be 9 your time would be 7 a.m. my time?
7 a.m. your time would be 9 my time, yeah.
So any time within 2 hours of that I could do.
Okay, so 9, 10.
9 or 10?
Let's do 10 a.m. That way some people on the West Coast can wake up.
Okay.
So we're gonna do a little bit more on the show today, but we will do another episode of this 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which will be 7 a.m. Pacific Time on Friday. So go ahead and mark your calendars. And we're going to talk about some trends. We're going to talk about some underrated skaters. We're going to talk about music, which is something that's very important to skating. The music that were in videos shaped a lot of skaters. And we're going to get into that. And we're going to get into how I got into music and what shaped me music-wise. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. So, yeah, is there anything else we want to cover today, Frank, from our list?
I
guess we could finish it off with something short, which is our top 5 videos.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, let's do that.
You want to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, I'm just going to list them. Top 5 videos. I'm going to start from oldest to newest, and my first favorite video, which I can't actually watch it anymore because it's too primitive and painful to watch now, is Harvesting the Crust.
Oh yeah, okay.
And I watched that video so many times. I loved it, and with the quality of the footage and the skating and stuff, going back and watching them, I'd rather watch something more modern. But it is still one of my favorite videos. A video that progressed a lot. It would have been a quantum leap, you could say. Would have been VG4, and VG4 was just the first video I remember. It was the perfect video.
Yeah,
perfect tricks, perfect style, so much good skating. Music was fantastic, awesome. And these are in no particular order except by date, ish. Then I'm gonna have to say Brain Fear Gone is up there.
Interesting.
Because it just has some of my favorite skaters in it.
Okay.
Elliot. I loved Elliot and Shima at the time, and anybody on Mind Game at that time was really good, and I liked the music. And Mind Game was our closest competitor.
Yeah.
We had Shima and Haffy both rode for Mind Game.
Yeah.
So and
John Elliott
really good, and Elliot. So basically it transitioned. So Brain Fear Gone is going to be there. Then I was trying to leave videos I've worked on out of this, but I'm just gonna have to say Leading the Blind, because even though it was something I worked on, I still consider it one of the top 5 videos, especially to myself. And I can get into like my videos in the next show a little bit more, but that's one. And then a more recent video that I really, really enjoyed, and I actually went to the premiere of this with Jared at Winter Clash, and that was Delphon Dio. And that was the one, the Athens video. It was just the way it was filmed and the quality of it and the vibe. I really liked it. So that's going to be my top 5. I mean, there's a lot of other videos I like, and maybe if I did more research, it would change, but that's what I'm going with right now. Let's hear what you have to say, Frank.
Okay. That's interesting. Brain Fear Gone. I wouldn't have guessed that with you. So on your list, I would copy the list for sure with VG4, one of my favorites of all time, no question, hands down. Dave did a great job with that video in particular. I feel like it felt worldly in a way that nothing before that had. He had different kinds of music, lots of like jazz, and I don't know. I'm not going to do a good enough job representing it because I haven't prepared like a spiel for it. But VG4 was amazing, and then not Brain Fear Gone, fucking Leading the Blind. Those two, 100%. I would think that if you took a survey of rollerbladers worldwide, you would get those two videos very well represented on people's top 5 lists. So I think that you and I are more or less in line with the rest of our community in thinking that those two efforts, one by you and Pat and the rest of the guys at Rat Tail, and then Dave and whoever else helped Dave at Video Groove back in the day with VG4. So those two, 100%, absolutely on the top 5 in no particular order list. Personally, my favorite video of all time is The Bottom Line. I love the music. I love the skating. I love the energy. Interestingly, everybody in that video was a teenager. I don't know that Arlo or anybody was even old enough to drink yet. So everybody would have been 20 years old or younger. And there was just a great vibe to that video, great music. And there really was, I made Cody Sanders watch it once, and he was like, oh God, I'm going to get ready to see a whole bunch of soul grinds and front sides, right? And I said, you damn right. Great skating, though, really well representing across the country. That stands out to me as the best. It's my favorite of all time. So that's 3 videos. I liked Lonnie's video, Feet 3. I wrote a BMAG article saying I thought it was a masterpiece. I really hold by that. I think it was a masterpiece of Lonnie's. I really liked how he didn't use second angles unless it was to show the story. There's a gap that David Sizemore does where he's in like a weird parking lot, and he's going to like 360 over a thing and into like a gutter. And it doesn't line up. And Lonnie used the different angles to show how awkward the angle was that Dave was trying to jump and spin into this thing.
Right.
And so it wasn't just like for no good reason. It was like the different angles, it wasn't because he just had 2 cameras that day. It was because he had to explain how complicated the situation was, or that there was a crack in the rail, and you'll see the close up of like the wheel rolling over the crack,
Right.
To tell the story of the trick, that this is harder because there's a crack right we have to jump on, or there's a manhole cover right where you want to land or something like that. So it all felt very purposeful. The skating I thought was really, really good. All the stuff that you and Lonnie made was always my favorite stuff. Same thing with friends of mine who are in bands. Anybody I know doing stuff is better than someone I don't know doing stuff. That's always been my bias. So feet 3, and that would definitely be on my list. And then, and then one of your early videos that I would have been in, like Scratched or America's Army,
Yeah.
I would put that on there just for my own bias. That that's the first time I held a VHS tape that had a logo printed on it, and I was on that tape, and I could show it to my grandma, and I could show it to my friends at school who didn't skate. So yeah, like America's Army or Scratched.
And these two videos are videos that I did back in the mid 90s, like 96, 97, and they were for Scum Magazine, which was an online and print zine I did back in the day. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it.
Yeah.
The videos I sold, I made them myself, I duplicated them myself, and I sold them. So they're out there. America's Army had a bunch of different versions.
Yeah.
I recently acquired one that's in decent shape. So I've been remastering videos of mine. So far, I've put 3 on the channel. I've done United Front 1, United Front 2 Trash, and I put up Last Call. And I'll be putting up all these old videos eventually here to the channel, as well as old edits and all sorts of stuff. I got all sorts of stuff to put on the channel. But yeah, so, and is that all 5?
Yeah, that was 5.
Okay, so we got your 5 videos. So yeah, I think that's a good wrap. Let's go through any comments we might have missed before we.
There's a buttload of porn things.
Is there?
Yeah, there's 5 of them.
Jeez. How is this happening all the time?
How much simpler
things
were you made it when you were a video?
Okay, first of all,
yeah,
Tree has not done the 2 for 4 in rec skates yet, but he was going to. And I want to say a big shout out to Santiago Espura for being in the channel. I hope all is well. Good to see you. You've been on a few of the shows. Always great to see you.
Oh, shit. Santiago's there.
Yeah, Santiago. And back to trending topics, keychain leashes. I forgot about that, but I put that on the list, so that'll be something we talk about. And then part 3, let's go, Tree. We hope to see you in the live chat on.
Let's go. Let's get it.
On Friday. And if you want to join us on Friday, Trey, send me a message. I'm sure it would be cool to have you on and chatting with us a little bit. And then, so let me see. You guys keeping the dream alive. Thank you, Oscar. This is to you, Frank. Love all this academic point of views on blading.
Yeah.
Frank is the professor. We call him professor of rollerblading. I just made up that term right now, but that is what he's called. He is rollerblading's professor. And you should have give degrees to people.
Like I should award degrees?
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. After somebody's written their 50th article on rollerblading discourse, I'll award them a degree.
And then Remy says Del Fondio is a masterpiece. Have you seen Del Fondio?
Did David Sizemore make that?
No, it's made by Benjamin Butner, and
I watched it.
Yeah,
I watched it.
It's good. It's got Dominic Wagner and all those guys. It's
yeah. Yeah, that was a great video. I probably did it as a VOD and only watched it the 1 or 2 times. So I can't recall videos that I've VG4 or something. The bottom line, something that I've watched literally hundreds of times. I can recall every section, every trick, every outfit, every pair of skates, all that. Even today with pretty high fidelity. These movies that have come out in the last 10 or 15 years, I may have only seen them once or twice. And so it's really hard with all the clutter in my brain to produce a good recover a good synopsis of what happened. But I do remember having a good impression of the Del Fondio video.
Yeah, it was a good one. I was actually to premiere with Jared. It was pretty cool. And then Brain Fear Gone was like a mind game tape. And yes, it was a mind game tape. That is correct. And Canada is here again. Frank Stoner is really around. Oh, Frank Stoner is all around good man, bro. I'm glad I had the time and friendship. Austin skate scene was sick when I moved there from Canada.
Yeah, so, cheers, man.
Good to see you in here. Oscar mentions The Groovy Dead by Jonas Hansen. I haven't seen that. Is that when it just came out? I don't remember. But Jonas
I've never heard of that.
Really good edits and videos. There's some really good filmmakers right now that are like, actual filmmakers.
Uh-huh.
And he's one of them.
That's cool.
Does really good work.
I'll have to check that out.
And Jared says Lonnie had the best videos because the beats matched the landings. And Lonnie was good with that. He also used a lot of music with beats. He used a lot of hip hop, which makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Bum 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 bum. Yeah. That was cool that Lonnie did that. That might have been one of the game changer things that happened outside of tricks.
Yeah, that's true. And then Drinking Pool Water says, always love seeing the Days of Confused rail in Austin. Frank skated it a bunch. It was actually in Georgetown, outside of Austin, at the high school. And that was
Champion went there with us one day and just completely murked that rail. I mean, he probably did 45 tricks on that rail in one day, and he'd never been to it before. I mean, I've probably done 50 or so tricks on it in total, but not just thrown down in in 2 hours,
Right.
Champion murked that thing.
He did murk that thing. I was there with you guys that day.
Yeah, everybody. It was you, me, Lonnie, probably Jay, the whole gang, everybody.
That time the Champion came, the first time he came to Austin, because his mom or his little brother wanted to go to the zoo in San Antonio, and Champion didn't want to go, so his mom dropped Champion off at my house. I'd never met him before.
Oh, that's cool.
We skated White Ledges at UT. That's where I had a clip of him and scratched America's Army.
Oh man, that was like 1,000 years. Holy shit, I remember that.
95 or so.
Yeah, that was way back.
Yeah.
He had a right foot royale down white grind.
Yep.
I remember that photo. Wow.
And then
wow.
Remy says Ego was dope, and I was thinking about some of Razor's videos. Some of the early Razor's videos were pretty good because they had such good skaters. And also, looking back at Daily Bread videos, there was some good Daily Bread videos. I think Under Influence was good. Forest Fire was good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good videos. It's almost like you have to watch them all again to pick your top 5 versus there's ones you always remember. But it's hard to pick 5 when there's been so many.
I agree with that. If you're trying to be objective, it's just a nightmare, and you'd have to sit down and watch 400 or 500 hours worth of skate videos to be able to be more objective. But to me, the obvious way to pick them is by saying which of the videos I've watched more than 100 times, and I can name 5 that I've watched more than 100 times, and that's more or less the ones that I named. And so by that standard, it's pretty easy. If you're trying to be objective and say who had the most this and that and who did the best job of this and that, and had the best mix of whatever, objectivity is overrated.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. I want to remind everybody that we're going to do our next show on Friday, October 14th, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's if you're in California, 7 a.m. Wake up early.
Yeah, get you a coffee.
If you want to, hang out here with me and Frank again, that's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern Time, which is not too late for, or not too early for you East Coasters. And if you're someone living in Europe like Remy, it doesn't really matter. You're going to be golden unless you have to work. But yeah.
Thanks for coming on, Remy.
Friday, October 14th, that's in 3 days. We will be doing another follow-up with more topics. And on Thursday, this coming Thursday, October 13th, at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. California time, I will have Laura Picard for episode 27, the Done and Now Blading podcast. And I will go ahead and put out there ready. On Monday will be episode 28 of the Done and Now Blading podcast with Michael Martino. which should be interesting. That's going to be at, I believe, 8 p.m. on Monday, but I will be posting the link so you will know for sure. And then the Monday after that, I will have an interview again with Robert Guerrero for episode 29. And I hope to have Jason Howard on here for episode 30. So
yeah,
that's lineup we're looking at for the podcasts for next month. I'm going to try to start being more consistent on when they happen. Like, I'm going to try to do them on Monday nights at 8 p.m. if possible. Obviously, I'm doing on Thursday just because it's going to work out better. And if I'm interviewing somebody from Europe, it might be different. But I'm trying to make it to where Monday nights, at least 3 times a month, 8 p.m. is going to be the set time for the podcasts, because I feel like they're all over the place. It makes it harder for people to, have a schedule or know when they're happening. And Santiago's in agreement that Champion is the best.
Yeah.
And Shawn Michaels said, no love for Transcend. Transcend's good too. We'll throw it in there. Transcend's like the...
It was Bo, right?
I like Forest Fire a lot better than Transcend.
I like Forest Fire too.
Had some, iconic. We talked about him earlier. Brian Jaggers. Transcend had iconic Brian Jaggers skating and a lot of early San Diego skating. And it was almost like, a Quantum Leap video for me, Transcend to Forest Fire. With not just the skating, but also just the editing and the music and everything.
Yeah.
I made both of them. But it's definitely a good video. I just won't put it in my top 10 or top 5.
Yeah, I mean, honorable mention all the other videos.
Yeah, all the other videos, honorable mention. This is not like a necessarily the best 5 videos. It's just 5 that we like, that we could think of when we decided our best 5 videos.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good videos. And there's very few. I mean, there's some terrible videos out there, but very few videos were terrible. Most videos were good, and several videos were amazing. So there's a whole lot, a lot more very good videos and very bad ones. And I'm not even going to mention the bad ones because,
well, that's rude.
Don't want to be negative on this. We try to minimize negativity on this channel because there's been way too much negativity in rollerblading for the past 30 years.
30 years, yeah.
And you see it on comments on people's posts and videos and reels and so try to keep it positive here on the Done and Now Blading channel. Zeke the Geek, any thoughts on whether the entire switch up should be considered switch or natural? For example, soul to switch soul, top soul doesn't exist. It's either natural soul to top soul or switch soul to top soul.
My answer to that is if you take the entire sequence and do it both ways, left foot to right foot or right foot to left foot, whatever the whole permutation is, the entire sequence one way versus the entire sequence the other way, which one in aggregate is the easier, is the natural for the entire sequence? That's how I would answer that. We could come back to all this though. We should get going. This is
all right. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there one last time that Frank and I will be back for a second part of Let's Talk Rollerblading. Well, it's not a second part. It's just going to be another episode. It's going to be episode 7 of Let's Talk Rollerblading with Frank. Frank is a great guest. Hopefully we can do some more of these in the future once you get settled down with your new job.
cool.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure and hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon to be notified anytime I upload videos, share this video with your friends, and make sure to follow me on social media. I have links to my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in the description below. I've been uploading tons of reels on Instagram of old skate clips. They're amazing. Same with shorts on YouTube. So go ahead and check those out, share them. And yeah, thanks for supporting. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching me and Frank. Everyone, take care. And we will see you here on Friday, October 14th at 7 a.m. PST, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And let's roll the credits. And we're back. Goodbye.